If your dog watches you before doing something, that moment is more important than most people realize. Because your dog is not just looking at you, they are quietly deciding what to do next based on you. Most owners assume their dog is simply paying attention or waiting for a cue. But in reality, that glance is a moment of evaluation where your dog is measuring your behavior. This behavior happens so quickly that it often goes unnoticed. A brief look, a small pause, or a subtle shift in focus before action begins. Dogs do not move through the world randomly when they are connected to a human. They look for a stable reference point before committing to a decision. When the relationship is clear, that reference point is always you. Your dog uses your behavior to understand what should happen next. That means every glance carries meaning. It is your dog asking whether your behavior provides clarity or uncertainty in that moment. If your signals feel consistent, your dog waits and aligns with you naturally. But if something feels unclear, your dog begins preparing to act independently. This is where most people misunderstand what they are seeing. They think the dog is simply watching, but the dog is actually deciding. Because the decision never happens during the action itself. It happens in the moment just before it, when your dog looks at you. Once the decision is made, the action follows automatically. And by that point, your influence over that moment is already reduced. This is why timing often feels off to owners. Their dog reacts before they can respond or moves in ways they did not expect. Not because the dog ignored them, but because the decision was already made earlier. That earlier moment is the one most people never recognize. Over time, these small decision moments begin to shape behavior patterns. Each glance becomes a point where your dog either waits or chooses. And each time your dog chooses instead of waiting, the pattern strengthens. That is how independence begins forming beneath the surface. The behavior you see is only the result of a decision already made. And that decision always starts in the moment your dog looks at you. At first, these changes are subtle enough that they don't stand out. Your dog still looks at you, but the glance becomes shorter and less dependent. Instead of waiting fully, your dog begins preparing to act at the same time. That overlap between watching and deciding is where the shift begins. To most people, this looks like confidence or maturity. But in reality, it reflects a change in how much your dog relies on you. Dogs do not reduce reliance without a reason. They do it when their environment feels more predictable through their own judgment than through yours. This doesn't mean your dog is trying to take control. It means your dog is trying to create clarity where it feels inconsistent. Each independent decision reinforces itself. The more your dog chooses, the more natural that behavior becomes. Over time, the need to check in begins to fade. The glance becomes less important because your dog already expects to decide. This is when owners start noticing something feels different. Their dog reacts faster, listens selectively, or moves without hesitation. But these are not sudden changes. They are the result of many small moments where your dog chose instead of waited. Each of those moments quietly reshaped the relationship. And by the time it becomes visible, the pattern is already established. The dog is not being difficult or stubborn in these situations. They are simply acting on decisions they trust more in that moment. And those decisions were formed long before the action you are now seeing. This is why the glance matters more than the behavior itself. Because it is the point where your dog decides whether you are still relevant to the situation. A dog that consistently watches and waits is still connected to your direction. That connection means your influence is still active. A dog that watches but begins deciding at the same time is already shifting. The connection is still there, but it is weakening. And a dog that stops watching altogether has already changed the relationship completely. At that point, decisions are being made without you. This shift is not dramatic, which is why it is often missed. It happens quietly through repetition, not through one clear moment. Dogs adapt quickly to patterns they experience every day, and those patterns become the foundation of how they behave. If the pattern teaches them to rely on you, they will continue to do so. If it teaches them to rely on themselves, they will adjust just as quickly. Which means the most important moment is not what your dog does. It is what your dog does just before they do it. Because that is where the decision is made. And that decision determines whether your dog is still moving with you or moving on their own. And once that shift becomes consistent, bringing it back is always harder than maintaining it from the start.